Resting on land belonging to the Miwok and Nisan people, Sutter's Fort was first established in 1939 and originally called New Helvetia, or New Switzerland, by colonizer John Sutter. Sutter viewed it as an optimal site due to its natural resources and location in the valley. The construction of the site occurred over several years and was built by and worked by Nisan, Miwok, and Native Hawaiian peoples. Sutter and the other white settlers' mistreatment of Native Americans throughout the construction and working of the fort is often forgotten in favor of Sutter's romanticized colonial narrative. By the time the gold rush ended, only the central building of the fort remained. Ownership of the fort was passed around until it was purchased by the Native Sons of the Golden West, a fraternal heritage group that sought to protect pioneer history. In 1889, the Native Sons decided to rebuild the fort, to reconstruct and to preserve a piece of settler California history. They began reconstruction in 1891 and, with limited archaeological abilities, reconstructed a notably smaller fort with multiple differences from the original. The reconstruction efforts and the early park curators focused their attention on the history of John Sutter and the American settlers that came to California. This trend would continue throughout the rest of the 20th century and practically until the present day. Settler nostalgia, strengthened by popular culture and Eurocentric history, continually reinforced Sutter's Fort's romanticized history and disregarded the native people who continued to remain on the same land. In efforts to correct past historical and cultural interpretations, in the summer of 2020, Mellon Public scholar and Native American Studies PhD candidate Anthony Burris first began working with Sutter's Fort Cultural and Historical Team and the California State Parks Tribal Affairs Division to work on including more Indigenous voices and perspectives at the fort. He worked on suggestions on how to improve the park's experience. Among his suggestions that were implemented, he urged the park to end self-guided audio tours, which included problematic historical interpretations of Indigenous people. And in long-term goals, Anthony urged Sutter's Fort to update self-guided materials to reflect Native people's viewpoints and history, as well as updating curriculum for visiting school groups to reflect on the fort as a site of remembrance rather than nostalgia. When I joined the same project in the summer of 2021, I initially worked alongside the Tribal Affairs Division to continue Anthony's work in some capacity. After some time reflecting on how we should move forward with the project, I ended up working with the Sutter's Fort Historical Team to improve historical interpretations at the park. One area where the park felt like they needed more input was working with the docents and volunteers and encouraging them to expand and incorporate newer and broader historical scholarship within their work at the park. In the past, some docents and volunteers have been skeptical of new scholarship and changes made at the park that reflected a more diverse narrative. So, in consultation with both the Tribal Affairs Office and the Sutter's Fort team, I created an extensive annotated bibliography for the docents and volunteers about different historical topics that connect to the fort in some way. There are 5 in total. This project was not necessarily designed to be made public, but to be distributed in parts or sections to the docents and volunteers so that they could do research on certain aspects of the park's narratives. This annotated bibliography was historically and consciously situated within ideas of historical memory, cultural myths, and memorialization in the 20th century. We wanted to make the docents and volunteers consider how Sutter's Fort and its history was affected by these concepts after it was rebuilt in the 1890s. The idea was to give the volunteers and docents a meta view of historical narratives within Sutter's Fort. Each section had a small essay followed by an annotated sources. Part 1 was an overview of the discipline of history. I discussed the importance of sources and how historians piece together narratives. I illustrated how historians are consistently met with fragments that are constantly being reevaluated and reinterpreted by new historians. I also highlighted different subfields and subdisciplines within history. Part 2 discussed how historians have created cultural myths about the American West and California history. I discussed the historiography of the American West, as well as how the subfield evolved from historical narratives solely based on white settlers to narratives that showed the diverse experiences of all different sorts of people in the West. I situated the fort into a larger narrative of romanticizing of Western history that sanitized the violence committed against Indigenous people and other people of color. Part 3 focused on memorialization in the West and California. I distinguish the differences between memory and history and how memory often encompasses ideas of heritage and the identity of a community and can provoke intense reactions. I also included readings on the cultural and social climate of the late 19th and 20th century California to see how historic memory and memorialization was formed. Part 4 focused on tourism in the American West and situated Sutter's Fort in a historiography of tourism in California, in the American West, and broadly the United States. In the last part, I discussed living history interpretations and historical reenactments in relation to historical accuracy and community engagement. I attempted to show that while important to public engagement, living history exhibits and historical reenactments can be deeply problematic. I also discussed the possible issues with the idea of authenticity in living history exhibits and historical reenactments. This project was a unique surprise this summer. I had originally entered the project thinking I was going to work with both Sutter's Fort State Park and Marshall Gold State Park to create self-guided walking tours that highlighted Native American history. For various reasons, this did not happen, but I'm really happy with what I ended up doing. Firstly, I think it was a really good exercise for me as a historian to see if I could deconstruct historical theory and academic jargon and relay it to a public audience, especially a very specialized public audience like docents and volunteers. These folks know the history of the park better than I ever will, and so my goal was to try to get them to take a step back and to reflect on how the narratives they believe are affecting others, especially local Native communities, but also the thousands of visitors that come through the park each year. It was a difficult balancing act to acknowledge their dense historical knowledge on this one topic, but to also draw them out of their one particular expertise. So in that respect, I enjoyed having to relay information that I know well and try to repackage it to a new and understandable ways. Secondly, I'm hoping that my work and words will inspire these volunteers to not only individually investigate these new parts of history, but that they will change how they relay information to the fort's visitors. Maybe this annotated bibliography will inspire them to think about the park not only as a relic of the mid-19th century, but also as a place that has absorbed histories from the 20th century. I hope that in combination with Anthony's work from the summer of 2020, that Sutter's Fort can continue to move away from the romanticized narratives about the gold rush and the colonization of California. The statue of Sutter was removed from downtown Sacramento in June 2020, and the fort is still wrestling with how to build on the momentum of the public asking for new and more accurate narratives of the past. I hope in part that my work will work toward giving the public these answers. I hope the park will continue to strive to include Miwok and Nisan voices and view the fort as a site of remembrance. This project has truly been a great experience, and I'm grateful to the Tribal Affairs Division, including Sabine Talagon, Anthony Burris, and Brittany Arona, as well as the folks at Sutter's Fort, including Devin McCutcheon, Nancy Jenner, Elena Mastis, and John Frazier, and my project faculty advisor, Kat Whiteley. I'm also grateful to the Mellon Public Scholarship Program here at UC Davis for this funding opportunity, as well as our class this last spring that was taught by Stephanie Maroney and Erica Colzarenas, and the rest of my Mellon Public Scholar cohort. Thank you.